Hi there, my name is Ron Rogers, and this presentation is titled The Rise and the Fall of the ALPA National New Aircraft Committee. Now, ALPA is, of course, the Airline Pilots Association, and this was a national committee. And hey, that guy with the arrow there, isn't that the coolest, most steely-eyed guy you've ever seen? Well, that's me when I was a chairman of it. But let me tell you about this committee and how politics and jealousy led to its unfortunate eventual downfall. This committee was well respected at the time within ALPA and also within industry. And I have a number of letters from industry people telling how well this committee was respected. And it was well respected because of the people, not me, but because of the people I was able to bring on to this committee. And that is an interesting part of the story. Now, when I first came on this committee, I had just come back from furlough. I was a second officer on the 727, and this was a presidential committee at the time. It reported directly to the president of ALPA, which is a high-level committee, and they asked United Airlines for a member. I was the only member selected out of 6,000 pilots, which I think is kind of interesting. But I had a recent flight test background. I'd worked for Boeing in flight tests, so that kind of makes sense. I think I was the only one with really recent experience, and I knew an individual who had been fairly high up in the ALPA structure. We talked on ham radio while I was furloughed, and he was the one recommending me. In fact, I had just come back from furlough, and I didn't necessarily want to take on any duties or anything, but he convinced me to go on, so I was. So I'm on the committee. I'm a second officer, and at that time, you didn't get to chair an ALPA National Committee unless you were a captain, and that's rightfully so. You needed to be a respected person in the airline industry to represent the pilots, and it's appropriate that the head of a committee, especially one like this, would be a captain. So I came on. And I was a member and I was having a good time. And I was a member for 7 years. And the guy to my right there in the brown jacket, that's Ken. And Ken had been the chairman for most of the time I was on the committee. And Ken was very eager to give it up. So, okay. I finally made captain in 91 and I got made chairman of the committee in 92. Now, up until that time, we had only flown one airplane, and that had been the Airbus 320. Now, this was the new aircraft committee. We were supposed to evaluate aircraft. Well, how do you evaluate aircraft? You don't get to fly them. Well, none of the manufacturers really had any interest in giving us flights in the airplane, except for Airbus, which are really pushing their airplane hard at the time. The rest of the manufacturers, they didn't really care. So it was a committee that kind of looked at drawings and stuff, and that was about it. It kind of operated at a very low level. Okay, I come on as chairman, and one of the mandates of the committee was to inform the pilot group of about new airplanes, and I felt we need to do this. That's part of the mandate. So we need to publish articles, and there had been an article published about flying the Airbus 340, but it was published by an outside person. It was an evaluation, and I said to the editor of the magazine, I said, we have a committee that's supposed to be doing that. If there's going to be an evaluation published in the magazine, it should be from our committee. And he says, okay. Well, shortly thereafter, Airbus says, hey, we'd like you to send over a reporter, a journalist, to fly on the 330 and the 321, and we're going to do an evaluation. Okay, well, the editor called me up and goes, okay, smarty pants, they need somebody to fly it. You want to do it, so you go. Oh, and by the business cards, that's some of the iterations of the committee. It was a new aircraft evaluation certification committee. We combined it with the airworthiness and performance committee, and then it became the aircraft development and evaluation programs, and I went from being chairman to a director, which I don't know quite what the difference is, but that's the way it went. But okay, so this is the start. Now there's something that very interestingly happens when you start publishing articles about somebody's airplane. Well, they're getting free advertisement. It's going out to 60,000 some pilots and a bunch of people in industry, because people follow this magazine also. So now all of a sudden, the manufacturer is getting a lot of publicity. So we started getting invites for the committee to come and fly other airplanes. Now that is kind of an interesting thing, because not only were we getting kind of an advertisement to all the other manufacturers to come and fly their airplanes, which they were very eager to do to get the free publicity. But I started getting resumes from people all over the place. And I mean, my gosh, the quality of person that I was able to bring on the committee. Now, when I became chairman of the committee, Ken, the previous chairman, says, hey, what you should probably do is ask everybody on the committee to resign and then just keep the people you want. Well, I didn't feel too good about the first thing that I would be do as chairman is fire everybody. And there were a lot of political aspects to that too. It might not have been a bad idea. It probably wouldn't have gone over very well because I had some deadwood on the committee. People who just really didn't bring a lot to it. They didn't have much in their background, and I tried to get rid of them. And boy, the pushback I got from that was pretty extensive. Like I said, there's a lot of politics. This is a union, and that's one thing I fought too. We would go to evaluate aircraft, and they go, well, you're a union, right? You're worried about, how many seats are on the airplane for the pilots and the labor stuff. And I go, well, we have a technical interest in the aircraft too, and that's important. And it was kind of hard to get over that, but we did. And we got a lot of respect. But some of the people I brought in, I brought in a guy who had been Steve, who had been the Joint Task Force commander of the F-15s out at Edwards. He was a fellow in the Royal Aeronautic Society. He became a fellow in the Society of Experimental Test Pilots, and he was the Air Force Test Pilot School deputy commandant. And after he was on my committee and retired from airline service, he went on to be the Boeing chief pilot on the KC-767, the senior engineering test pilot at Bombardier Learjet Flight Test Center in Wichita. And now he does a lot of consulting work. And he was upgraded to a fellow, which is the highest position you can be in the Society of Experimental Test Pilots. Okay, he was on that committee. Another guy who became my vice chairman, and I later turned the committee over, a guy named Terry. Terry became the first American test pilot in Airbus. After he retired, he became a test pilot at Airbus, and one of the first things they did was they had him fly the 380, so that's really cool. Now, the thing about it is I was limited on the number of people I could have on my committee, and this list of resumes I had was just eye-watering. I had to turn down Jim. And Jim's a super guy. He's a fellow in SATP. He became the president of SATP for a season, and he's now the president and CEO of the National Test Pilot School. And I had to turn him down because I didn't have a slot for him. I mean, give me a break. So, and these aren't even all the articles. I published some 30 articles or so. Most of them were in the Airline Pilot magazine. But the committee ended up doing evaluations on the ATR 72-200, the Airbus 340, the Airbus 321, the Airbus 330-300, the MD-90, the Saab 2000, the 777, a couple of flights on that. I actually had a committee member who went and worked for Boeing for a while on the program. The Dornier 328 prop, the Fokker F-70, the A319, the ATR 42-500, the 737-600, the 800 and the 777-300, the A330-200, the C-17 that are trying to sell as the MD-17, the Avro RJ-100. That was a nice flying airplane. The 757-300, the Bombardier Q-400, the Boeing 717-200, the 767-400, and finally, interestingly enough, the Boeing 247, which was kind of my Finney flight. Now, Airbus actually, I was very critical of their design. I had criticisms of every airplane they fly. Nobody builds a perfect airplane. I think we all see that now. But, I always had criticism, so I wasn't anybody's favorite person necessarily. Although a lot of my guys retired at 60 and went into flight test jobs and that, like I mentioned. I stayed on to 65, and I had enough flying, so I was happy to retire. But even Airbus, who I was very critical of, they liked the one of the articles I did on the 319 that they got 3,000 reprints of it to distribute. And in this whole process, I did a paper. I wrote a paper. I wanted to put down, since I had flown all these airplanes, and my committee had flown all these airplanes, I wanted to put down kind of, thoughts about the differences between the flight control philosophies, between the hard protections of Airbus and the soft protections of Boeing, and just general mechanical flight control designs and things like that. And in the process, I submitted a paper, and I submitted it to Site Experimental Test Pilots, and it actually was selected as Best Technical Paper of the Year back in '99, and also I was selected as a Laurels winner, Aviation Week and Space Technology. Both these things surprised me. I got a letter in the mail, which I thought was tickets to the banquet, and it was saying, hey, I won the award from SATP. And then I'm reading the magazine, the Aviation Week Space Technology, and I'm just going down through the awards because I always like to read those, and I see my name. Talk about fun. And there's getting presented the award at the Symposium of Society Experimental Test Pilots. That's me on the left, my wife in the center, and David Hartman, who is our Master of Ceremonies. And if you're interested in the paper, that's the link to it up there. And that's the beautiful little cover there. And there was a lot of fun with this committee. I was chairing a presentation at the Airline Pilot Association National Convention, and Boeing had this model there, and they actually had the little plaque covered over. And at the end of the panel that I was chairing, I was concluding it, and Chet Ekstrand, who is the Vice President of Technical Affairs, said, "Just a minute, we got something here." And he brought this up. And there's the nice little plaque. It's presented to me because I was the working together team leader. And Boeing recognized ALPA, which was very gracious of them. They were awarded the Collier Trophy. And of course, the big Collier Trophy is at the Air and Space Museum, and they're you get little Collier trophies, and all my team members are listed on this one. I'm in the upper right. You can't read it, but trust me, I'm there. And one of the things of this job is the absolute bins of knowledge. I have all sorts of handouts they gave me, and that helps me kind of going back through some of these things here when I'm talking about these various airplanes. And I'm going to talk about flight test on these the various airplanes that we were able to fly, and do some presentations on that. And I hope you find that interesting. But back to this cool Studley picture here, me in the center there. And like I said, the previous chairman is to my left, your right, looking at this picture, Ken. And Ken was a super guy. I kept him on the committee for kind of like, industrial knowledge, if you want to put it that way. And kind of the fun thing is you see the guys in the orange flight suits there on either side. Both of them were test pilots that I knew out at Edwards when I was out there. And the one on the left actually came to United as a pilot. And we also hijacked, probably not a good airline term, but another test pilot from NASA who came over and flew with us for a while. So I got joking. I said, hey, you guys aren't going to let us fly the airplanes, because we keep stealing your pilots. And then next to the guy on your far left there in the white shirt, he was also a test pilot that I knew out at Edwards. It was kind of fun meeting him again in this situation where we're flying the MD-90 there. And we had a lot of fun. Flew the Boeing 777-300, and of course the 777-200, the basic, and they gave us a nice little medal of the first flight. And we're flying the 737. That's Mike Carricker on the far left. He was the Boeing chief test pilot there. He became the 787 chief test pilot. He was going to become the Sonic Cruiser chief test pilot when Boeing was looking at a near supersonic aircraft, but they decided that they would go with the 787 as the airplane it become. But my thing was they were looking at the A380 at the time, and I said, as a marketing thing, I'd rather get to my place 3 times faster, my airport 3 times faster than weight and baggage claim with 600 more people. And also here is the actually the first time I flew the 777, and this was a kind of a mix of ALPA and if ALPA. I've got some British Airways pilots because they were also getting the aircraft. And we flew the Saab 2000, flew the Saab 340 also, and I brought along committee members. That's me, second to the left there, and the 2 test pilots are on either side. And of course, you know how pilots like to stand in front of propellers, and put their hand on it and look cool here. Well, this is the RAT, the ram air turbine that powers emergency systems on the 777-300. I flew the 777-300 only using hydraulic power off of the RAT, which is kind of interesting. And we found out some interesting flight characteristics, actually, because like I've said before, airline pilots do not fly airplanes like test pilots. And we found some interesting aspects that if you put in aggressive controls and you don't have sufficient hydraulic pressure on the spoilers to keep the spoilers from floating up, they lock down. So I was doing some aggressive rolls with this to see, how well it performed on RAT power. And the spoilers were locking down, which the chief test pilot, Frank, at the time was going, well, what's that? Why is it doing that? So that was kind of interesting. And here's kind of an unfortunate picture. That's Nick Warner there, who was killed. And I talk about that in one of my other videos in a A330 test flight. I flew the 321 with Nick and also the 330 and 340 with him. And we also flew regional jet type of aircraft. We're flying a CL-65 here, and that's me in the center there on the steps, and some other pilots I brought along. Some of them were committee members, and other people were from the group of pilots who would actually fly the aircraft. So we're giving them an introductory. And Dornier, a German company, builds an absolutely, it's Fairchild Dornier. They build an absolutely, and I got some interesting stories on going over to Munich to fly the Dornier 328. Ended up flying, they had a 328 prop and a 328 jet. And they both about did the same thing, except the jet burned about 1,000 pounds more gas on the same stage length. But passengers don't like propellers because they look like they're dangerous aircraft. So, okay, whatever. So they were doing this more for passenger acceptance than anything else, because this aircraft operated over similar, or was designed to operate over similar stage lengths. And then also flew the Embraer 145. And the interesting thing about this is I went out to fly it on the same day that ValueJet crashed in the Everglades. I'm down at Fort Lauderdale to fly this, and ValueJet crashed due to the oxygen converters catching fire in the hold. And we were going out to fly, and we had an overheat on the window on his side, and it started blistering. And being a true test pilot, he reaches out the window to check to see if it's really hot and burns his hand. Well, we canceled. We came back in, and they said, do you know that the ValueJet had just crashed? Now here's a picture, and I must apologize. This is in the slide's in backwards, but this is the committee inspecting one of the Airbus. I think it's a 330 here before a flight. Now, I mentioned that politics intervened. Here's what's kind of happening. We were going through reorganizations, and the Central Air Safety Chairman then became the person I reported to. And I got along well with the first couple of them, but they brought in a rather bombastic attorney from another airline, and he and I didn't get along. And he says, I don't care about how an airplane flies. I want to know if the captain can reach the crash action emergency. And I said, well, I think the pilots really kind of do care about how airplanes fly. And we butted heads. Well, you know what happens when you try to urinate up a rope or spit up? When the guy above you doesn't like you, things don't necessarily go well. And I thought it was kind of a personal thing. And so I eventually turned my committee over to my vice chairman, Terry, and I thought, well, maybe things would work better. But in the process, when I was chairman of the committee, we had an ALPA committee meeting, national meeting, and the bombastic attorney, as I will call him, decided he's going to reorganize the structure. And in reorganizing the structure, I was the chairman of the second largest technical group in ALPA, and a friend of mine was the chairman of the largest technical group in ALPA, and these are big technical groups. Well, both of us were essentially organized out of the picture, and some of the things I think he was rather jealous of the committee and how much fun we were having, and the high quality people I have had on it. One of the other committee chairmen says, your committee is its own reward, and it truly was. We fly new airplanes, we do flight test stuff, and we get nice dinners. And one thing that I did, we started out doing basically airplane rides, and I said, we got to do more than that. I brought test pilots on with good background. We developed a very involved flight test scenario of things we wanted to see. In fact, the first flight on the 777 was a 5-hour test flight going through everything. And John Cashman, who was the chief test pilot there, said that the flight evaluation I put together was almost good enough for a certification basis. So we went from airplane rides to very sophisticated flight evaluations of the aircraft, and these were published in the magazine, and they were well received. Except by the bombastic attorney. Let's put it that way. So he reorganized it. They called it ADO Committee, Aircraft Design and Operations. And the guy he put in was one of his buddies who, in my personal opinion, was really unqualified for the job. No flight test background. And the committee just kind of went nowhere. Terry did a few evaluations that were really excellent, but then he ended up going to work for Airbus as a test pilot. And the committee just stopped doing flight evaluations. And part of the structure or the charter of the new aircraft committee was to inform the pilots what's going on. I guess they flew the 380 at least. There was nothing ever published about it, and Terry at the time was over there in Toulouse as an Airbus test pilot, and I said, hey, did they use my evaluation checklist? Because most of my committee members by then, because of what had happened with the reorganization, they just all drifted off, and they were left with I don't even know who's on the committee anymore, because there's no publicity about the committee or what it's doing. And I asked Terry, I said, did I do a good evaluation of the 380, or was it airplane rides? And Terry just kind of said, yeah, it was airplane rides. So the committee has gone downhill. We had a real good run for a good 10 years or so, put out a lot of good articles, did a lot of good work, was respected by the industry, and now I have no idea what's going on with the committee, but it's not publishing anything, and I don't think it has any respect anymore, or very little respect in the overall industry. But as kind of a parting gift, let's put it that way, from Boeing, they said, hey, do you want to fly the Boeing 247? Because a lot of former Boeing mechanics had restored this airplane, and it was beautiful. And I said, yeah. But of course, this was not an ALPA deal. ALPA wasn't paying for it, obviously, because we'd kind of missed the window on testing the Boeing 247. So I did this on my own dime. I mean, I traveled for free out to Seattle, and I paid for my hotel room, so it wasn't much of anything. But so I did this evaluation and flew the Boeing 247. In the end, some of the test pilots who I flew with said, you are the only non-Boeing test pilot who has flown both the 777 and the Boeing 247. So I kind of liked having this picture. And that was my last published article. Since it was my article, I actually got paid for this, which is interesting. All those articles that I wrote never got paid for it, because I never even thought about it. But our expenses were picked up by the committee, so there's no reason I would be paid for it, just because I wrote it. But since this was all on my own ticket, I actually got paid for it, which I thought was kind of funny. So that was my last published evaluation, and I also I gave it to Sport Aviation for free, and they put it in the magazine. So I and the other chairman, we called ourselves the bad boys of ALPA, and both of our committees were handed over to other people. It's like when the music stops, we didn't have a chair. And, well, that's the way it worked out. I hung around kind of ALPA technical committees for a little bit and then decided, well, I got better things to do. So I walked away from it. Anyway, I know it's a little long-winded. There's a lot of history there, but I just wanted to tell you about how the committee was, I thought, a really great committee, and the absolutely outstanding people that I was able to bring on the committee. And I think we did a lot of really good work in the time frame when we were doing these rather detailed evaluations. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Sorry it's a bit long, but thanks for watching.